Hello, you are listening to Quality Time, a podcast designed to support Nebraskan providers through their journey with Step Up to Quality. I am your host, Colleen Schmidt. Get ready to listen as we prepare to elevate each other as we step up to quality. Welcome back, listeners. Today we have a returning guest. Our guest today is Carrie Gottschalk. Carrie is a licensed mental health therapist who has spent her career working with children, youth, and families. Carrie, you might remember from season 2, she joined our podcast in season 2 and gave great suggestions and information on compassion fatigue and burnout. I just was loving on Carrie before we hit record because it's one of my very favorite episodes. So if you haven't listened to our episode from season 2 on compassion fatigue and burnout, please go back and do listen to that because it was a goodie. Today, we invited Carrie back to talk about trauma-informed practices for children. So this is more of I feel like our season 2 topic was a little heavy too. And when we talk about trauma, it also feels like a heavy lift. So I'm thankful for your yes, Carrie. So thanks for joining us again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me back.
I'm so glad you're back. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about trauma. So talk us through this a little bit. Tell us about trauma. What is it? I've heard different definitions of like this big T and little t way of looking at it. Is that an accurate picture, or just give us the kind of general definition of trauma?
Oh, wow. There is no general definition of trauma. I just wish that I could give a short sentence. The more I have been in this field and the more I have both researched as well as practiced in this arena, trauma really is a lot more about the person's response to the event than it is the event itself. And so when we hear things like big T, that might be a more significant, or boy, I even want to be so careful of my word choice here. When I say more significant, again, who's to say more significant? It depends on the person experiencing it. And so I don't want to, somehow imply that we should all have the same response. But big T typically is referring to those events that maybe we all societally would say those are really large traumatic events. Being a part of a tornado, being a part of a really impactful car accident, maybe where someone close to you passed away, where your life was in danger. Like oftentimes those are the kinds of things that we think, oh, big T trauma. Little T trauma, therefore, would also be this smaller. And again, I even hate that I use the word smaller. like that seems offensive because little T would be the daily type traumatic events that could add up over time, kind of more the regular daily stressors for all sorts of us. A divorce could be traumatic. A separation from a lifelong relationship, even including a pet, could be traumatic. Being teased or ostracized or bullied over time definitely is traumatic. And so that's the big T, little t that we hear about. I'll pause there and see if there's a question.
So there's not a question, but there's a reflecting going on in my brain. Because I'm thinking about what you're saying about how it's really the response to the event. It depends on the person. And even I'm thinking about personally growing up, I have a brother and a sister. And if you would ask the three of us, we all three have different perspectives on childhood, on growing up. It's almost like this individualized response. Am I correct in hearing that?
100%. Yes. And so, yes, I have used the example before or I have heard the example before, and then I have thus reused it. Let's say 100 people all enter the same life event, like a tornado. We have a small percentage who walk out with what would be diagnosable as PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet all 100 people technically experience the same event at the same time in history. And yet, because we're all such unique and different individuals, we don't all walk out with a trauma,
Mm-hmm.
we all walk out differently depending on so many factors.
Yeah, I think, again, while you're talking, it's making me think about how important empathy is and really trying to have that lack of judgment on just because we both experienced the same event, my response could be different than your response based on 100 different things just because of how individual we all are.
Absolutely. Like we can even do, it, lots of people are allergic to peanuts. A lot of people aren't. A lot of people have a gluten intolerance. A lot of people don't. Some people wear glasses. Some people don't. It's like, who am I to say that you shouldn't need glasses or you should be fine eating peanuts? It just depends on so many different factors. And so who am I to say what is and is not traumatic for you? That is very much the person's own experience based on all of these different factors and variables.
I even think of my own kiddos who we talked before hit and record. Carrie and I each have 4 children. I'm sure you would maybe say the same, Carrie, but my babies, when they just came into the world, all very much had a different temperament. Like, baby, I was born that way. Like, they just
100%.
none of the 4 were the same. They had varying different, either flexible, feisty, fearful, like all those. So I assume that probably plays a role in our response to trauma as well. Perhaps like temperament, does that impact how we respond?
Yes, absolutely. It's 100%. It's our DNA. It's our genetics and our epigenetics, the stuff we get passed on to us. It is absolutely there. Thus, also our temperament, our nature with which we see the world, and the lens through which we take it all in. Birth order is a real thing for those of you who are in families with multiple children. Every child is born into a new family. There is no such thing as, I raised them all the same. Well, no, you didn't, because you were raising your 3rd child with 2 older ones when you were, it's all different families. Every time a child is born into that family.
We should have a whole episode on birth order.
Yeah, we could.
Gosh, I love to geek out about that stuff. I'm not gonna go on that bird walk, but I'm gonna pin it and be like, that would be fun to talk about. Let's talk about the kids. So, how does trauma affect young children's learning and development? And what happens to us as adults if our traumas as kiddos aren't responded to? Those are 2 big questions.
Yeah. And so I'll just start with the first one. How does trauma affect young children's learning and development? And so if you have other episodes, or all the people listening who have kind of dove into that birth to 8, birth to 3, 5, we know that brain development is something that just happens over years and years and years. We understand that it's that birth to 3, birth to 5, birth to 8, however we want to have that kind of continuum to say this is when what fires together, wires together. This is where we're building our brain architecture. It's the foundation. It's the everything. And so when trauma or traumatic events are occurring in a little person's world, it does not by default mean that little person will end up with maybe PTSD or even an insecure attachment. What really is dependent on all of those factors, like that child's temperament, the genetics, the epigenetics, but then also the primary caregivers in that little person's world, and how available they are, how responsive they are, how really grounded and able they are to co-regulate for that little person. So how does trauma affect children's learning and development? Well, it upsets or disrupts the very foundation, the very frame and foundation of the house that's being built. So it impacts everything about their neural development. I have historically used this analogy where because we live in the Midwest, I can say ruts in the road. And the more again, because what fires together, wires together. And so we're kind of creating those neural pathways. And technically our brain is rather lazy in the sense that it will take the path of least resistance, and it will always flow down the pathway that's the most comfortable and the most common. And I will refer to that often as ruts in the road. And those are just kind of where your tires fall on a dirt or gravel road. It's the easiest to drive there. And I was actually reading a book recently, listening to this author. It's a phenomenal resource. I'm happy to share it at the end. But she didn't refer to it as ruts in the road. She referred to it as the Grand Canyon. And that terrified me. Because I used to be like, well, yeah, it takes a lot of repetition to create new ruts in the road. And so if you're really trying to change your own neural pathway, a lot of gentle self-compassion, knowing how much you have to work to create new ruts in the road. And then here's this author last week, and she's like, Grand Canyon. And I'm like, oh no, that's even harder. So anyway, it starts from little, it starts from birth on. And so how does trauma affect children's learning and development? It's really creating the pathways, it's creating the frame and the foundation. So what happens to us as adults when our trauma isn't responded to? Okay, so all the factors come into play, obviously. Often, there are definitely individuals who can have all these kind of right alignment of things, and they can experience traumatic events throughout their life, and they can have had certain things along the way in the right place at the right time that have helped them end up with very few or relatively minor symptoms as they age. I think what oftentimes seems to happen more often is people think, and I don't want this to be scary, like my like my Grand Canyon analogy, but I think people think they're doing okay for a really long time until they're not doing okay. And all of these things build and build and build and build. And, it could be things like sleep disturbances and irritability and impaired social or occupational functioning, feeling overwhelmed by life's demands, never really, and we call it like an allostatic load. That's kind of the terminology. If somebody wanted to, Google that and be like, there's this concept of allostasis that brings us back into homeostasis when disruption occurs. Well, if that just keeps happening over time, this allostasis ends up with this allostatic load that ends up with this allostatic overload. And so now all of a sudden we're 30, we're 40, we're 50, and we're like, how come? ... It's like, because you really worked really hard for a long time at being okay, and you never really got the stuff worked out that needed to be worked out. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes. And it's almost hard to hear like I'm sitting here listening and I'm like, ooh, I have stuff she's talking about that I just ignore and don't. I think we all do,
We do.
And I think that's part of the human experience, maybe, is having to figure out how to handle or face things that we don't want to face. But what I really found interesting was what you were saying about our caregivers and their response to how, if they're regulated or not. And they might be dealing with their own traumas that have never been, I don't know if healed's the right word to say, if it's ever healed or not, but I just think that it's such a good picture of how important having caregivers who are aware of responding to kids in an empathetic way, in a modeling regulation sort of way, in a co-regulation mindset, really bringing, I've heard the analogies of you want to bring the calm to the storm, not be the lighter fluid to the match kind of thing and make things explode. But I really like how you worded that, Carrie. That is, I knew I would love this episode with you because she always makes me think. So I wasn't expecting to have to think about my own childhood trauma, but here we are. And I do think everyone kind of hears that when you're talking. So what about why? Why is it crucial? And you already kind of touched on this a little bit, but give it to us even more. Why, as early childhood providers, do we need to understand the concept of trauma-informed practices for kids? Why does that matter?
Wow. Yeah, you did a really nice job of summarizing and answering that question. Truly, because it's so much easier to interrupt or prevent, right? it's so much easier to prevent than to repair. It's so much easier to try and get it right out of the gate than to end up as 20, 30, 40, 50, 60-year-old adults going back. And you said, what did you say? Heal. And the word I typically use, yes, I mean, I like the word heal. Absolutely. I also used, just the word process.
Oh, I like that better.
We just have to process this stuff because our brains have to process this stuff. And what happens, it can happen to us non-verbally. And that's the mind-body connection that I didn't even really step into quite yet, even though I did reference that homeostasis and allostasis. And what great research we have in this space now, that trauma is not cognitive. Trauma is not just something that lives in our thinking brain. Trauma is very much something that our bodies are designed right out of the gate. Genetically, we are designed to keep ourselves alive, and we still have this reptilian brain. We still have these systems at play within us that help us scan for threat and adjust, just in micro moments of muscle tension and heart rate, increase, and all of the different things that just go without our permission to go. And they're all designed to be nuanced and sensitive, even below our conscious awareness. And so when we say, what do we have to do with old trauma, or what do we have to do with trauma? We have to process it. We have to allow our brain and our body to come together. And I've heard people who have lifelong histories of kind of trauma, and they're like, I know that you can't see this because this is audio, but like they'll put their hand on their head and their hand on their heart, and they go, these two aren't even connected. Like these two don't even know each other. I heard a client say that recently. These two don't even know each other. I'm like, wow, that was such a beautiful and heartbreaking way to recognize that trauma is not a thinking problem, and it is not just a physical, like sleep disturbance or food allergy, food sensitivity, heart condition. It's a mind-body connection, and we have to introduce the two. Yeah. And we want them to become friends. So it's processing for the sake of both the body and the brain. Okay. I didn't even answer your question. So you said, why is it crucial for early childhood providers to understand trauma's impact on children? Because we can help. We can change it. We can prevent it, right? So why wouldn't we all want to be so aware of how this is impacting every single one of our brains? And if I'm the adult who my brain was fragile and my poor framing and my poor foundation was crumbly and misshapen and mismatched, what a better, more beautiful way for me to not just launch my own healing, but to prevent somebody else from being on that same path.
That's such a good way to talk about that, using our own healing to help kids and how we can make an impact and a difference. My husband and I often have conversations about like the future and children as adults and And we always think, what are we doing to mess them up? What are we doing wrong that someday it's going to come back out and they're going to talk about us in therapy and and some of that is just you grow up along with your kids. But I'm hoping you could share with our listeners some actual strategies. You're saying that they can make a difference. They can impact what's happening in children's lives. Like, what are some strategies for trauma-informed practices for kids? What's that look like?
First and foremost, 100% will not make sense, and yet it will. Self-compassion. Self-compassion, self-compassion, self-compassion. Research is so rich in this arena that we know being self-compassionate also allows me to be more compassionate outward. And so there's the phrase, the adage, you can't pour from an empty cup, and I think people have different feelings about that phrase. I think we overuse a lot of phrases because we really like them, and then they kind of become saturated and maybe a bit, overused. But nonetheless, we know that when we are compassionate with ourselves and we are really working on our own self-love, our own just internal self-care, just what it means, like how I talk to myself, that I have more to give to other people. That increases my ability to be compassionate outward as well. So I would 100% ask anyone working, well, just if you're breathing, go ahead and work on your self-compassion. If you're a breathing human, that's where I would really encourage people to go. The second is with that self-compassion, give yourself permission to do your own work. You're worth it. Like you're genuinely worth it. Like do your own work. Whether you want to define it as a traumatic upbringing or insecure attachment or a difficult relationship with, we all just kind of deserve to have some kind of outlet, way, space. And that can be books, that can be podcasts, that can be, actual therapy, that can be multi-week series, but investing in doing your own work, hands down, always will allow you to be the kind of parent and provider you want to be. So self-compassion, doing your own work. Those are the first two strategies before anything else. Okay, listen, but you probably want other strategies too.
Well, listen, lady, when I wrote that question, I was like, I was not expecting to hear the answer be self-compassion, self-love, permission to do your own work. I wasn't, but it makes so much sense. And it ties back into the episode we recorded in season 2 about compassion fatigue, self-care, burnout, all that kind of stuff. And that resonates with me. How do I help others if I'm also not loving myself enough to be on the list, kind of thing? But I love that you went there with that, Carrie. Yes, that makes good sense to me.
Because good. Because let's just, anyone who's worked in the field or is currently working in the field, let's just be real. Little people require a lot from us. And that's not a diss on little people. That's just the facts of being human. Little people require a lot of time and energy and care. Little people who do not have stable frames, I don't know, who's to say how they didn't get their stable foundation and their misshapen frame? I don't know. It's just how their little brain has been put together and what has come together in that human to create. We also know, I think we can generalize that the vast majority, like we can have 2 splits, we can have 2, 3, 4-year-olds, even infants. I don't want to say birth or whatever. We can have them go off the grid and we can have them sink off into this quiet, sullen corner where they're easy to forget about because they're not making a lot of noise and they're not bringing a lot of attention to themselves and they just kind of fall off the radar. Those kiddos require a lot from us. They're not yelling and screaming and kicking for it, but they require a lot from us because they're easy. Like I said, in all the hustle bustle of childcare, it's very easy to let those kiddos be off the radar. The ones that are getting all the time and attention are the ones that are kicking and yelling and screaming for it, both figuratively and literally. And I think all of us who have worked in that field understand how incredibly taxing and emotionally draining that can be. It's exhausting physically, it's exhausting mentally and emotionally to be an adult caring for children who are struggling in that way. And so by default, if I am not doing my own work and if I am not fueling myself with self-compassion, I will never have enough of what I need to try and be present with a child who is struggling to that degree.
Oh my gosh. Say it again for everybody.
Rewind, play it again.
That is, I need to hear that. Like, that's a good reminder for me. I still work in classrooms where I actually go in and work as a substitute teacher. I always, as a trainer, say, watch for the content babies in EH. I always talk about the content babies. Did I talk to him today? Did I even acknowledge, because he has this, temperament, like this flexible temperament. Put me anywhere, I'm fine. Even if I have a dirty pants, I'm not even going to make too much of a fuss if you don't check me. So I think that's always the constant struggle that many providers and educators face is this, there's so many needs. there's some children who squeaky wheel gets the oil, who are expressing their needs in big ways. And then there's our flexible, content kids who still have needs, but aren't expressing them the same. And I can't thank you enough for tying in the self-care piece of that, or the self-compassion, self-love, like being gentle with ourselves in order to be able to do this very hard job.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so are there like actual, I mean, of course there are there strategies that we can use in classrooms, in childcare settings as parents? They are so well researched and so well known. And I am feeling, admittedly, I will do my own kind of, okay, I'm feeling a little, I don't know, internal eye rolls happening. Because when I say these strategies, people are going to be like, yeah, Carrie, we know all those strategies. Like, we know all that. And I'm like, that's because those are the strategies. Like, we all know them because, and we're broken records in saying them. So what are my faves? What are my absolute faves? Here would be my top three. Number one, I am a huge visual schedule, like hands down. Every time I had foster kids in my home, visual schedules, don't care where they were on any kind of continuum of functioning, 100% always visual schedule. We cannot just expect anyone to comprehend us verbally alone, like auditorially is what I meant. And so that's one of my favorites always. A second one of my favorites always is parent-child interaction therapy, PCIT, also has a classroom version called teacher-child interaction training, TCIT. But nonetheless, both of these models have something called pride skills. I am a total pride skills junkie. I don't even know how to talk to kids anymore, like a normal human.
What are pride skills?
I only talk in pride skills.
Are they like affirmations? Talk to me about this. What's a pride skill?
I think you can Google it and find the acronym. It is praise, which we know in pyramid model world. So there is praise. There is reflection, which is like parroting. There is imitation, which means I'm going to do what you do to show attunement and some kind of a regulation. There is a description where I'm actually kind of being the narrator of the like the football game. Like if you couldn't watch it, I'm the narrator, so I'm describing what's happening. And the E is enjoyment. And so now it's like I go in and I don't know how to talk to children unless I am using pride skills. So for example, Michael runs up to me and Michael's like, Miss Carrie, look, I have an egg. And I go, oh, you do have an egg. And that would be like imitation, right? Like he said it, I said it back to him in this affirmative way. And I show enjoyment. And then he's like, look. And I say, oh my goodness, you are so excited. Thank you for sharing your egg with me. Okay. So I'm praising and describing this positive behavior that I want to have happen. So if we can have everybody like learn pride skills to the degree in which it just rolls off your tongue, love. That's hands down number two. So visual schedule, pride skills. And then number three, my third strategy is give yourself permission to do any kid different that needs to be done different. Like there's never a one size fits all, ever. And I don't care how great the science and the research is, anyone who has been around multiple children knows, just give yourself permission that maybe Michael needs it different. And so maybe Michael isn't ever going to get in trouble for blank. That's okay. That makes sense for Michael. It's his own little individualized plan because we know Michael and we know what he needs. It doesn't look like Sally and Henry and Jake. That's cool. So those are my three favorites.
Those are good favorites. I'm totally Googling pride skills after this because you were talking about it. I'm like, oh, that's kind of classy. Like from the class tool, I know where that is going, but the intent of it is different here. The intent is really to affirm, to build up connection, that kind of thing.
Big time. It's a part of the PCIT, TCIT model. We don't move on past phase one without mastery of pride skills. And like I said, I'm like, I don't even know how to talk to people, to little kids anymore.
Or adults. I bet you do it to adults too, and you don't even know.
You know what that is? It has helped me become far more comfortable delivering, like you did it so beautifully. Like you were all warm and fuzzy. You were throwing the praise at me before we hit record. That's a learned skill for adults to be able to deliver that to each other.
Yep.
And how
and to
important
receive
that
it,
is.
to
And
take
to receive it. Yes.
Like to take it. Yeah.
No.
Oh, I'm really interested in learning more about that. So thank you for that nugget. I definitely will be looking into that. And then the third tip that you shared about give yourself permission to handle situations different for different kids. Boy, I really, as a kindergarten teacher, got very hung up on procedure, on these are our expectations, this is how we do it, and there are consequent, things that I wouldn't do again. Hindsight's 2020, but I like that you're saying give yourself permission to meet individualized needs for kids.
Because I think we feel judgment. We feel a lot of judgment when someone walks by our classroom of, let's say, a dozen kiddos, and we've got one straggler, but we know why he or she is straggling. We know why they're holding the bunny, sucking on the thumb, and we're cool with it. Like it's exactly what she needs or he needs. But there's this perceived judgment of we're somehow not,
Yep,
treating them all the same or wrangling them all or following the whatever. It's like,
I know.
we know exactly why she's doing that.
I feel like that's gotten better over the I don't even know, last 5 to 10 years. I feel like I've seen more individualized supports in early childhood specifically.
Yes.
So I do feel like we are learning and growing and getting better. Our theme for this season is advocacy. So how does understanding all of this about trauma-informed practices support being an advocate for young children?
I'm going to open a box here. We talk a lot about closing the childcare gap. I'm just so grateful for the entities that are working in that space. So grateful for the effort that's been put into that space. And when I say I'm going to open my own little box and can of worms here, and we all know that, like we all talk about this, so we all know it, but it becomes if our theme is advocacy and we want to understand trauma-informed practices, how do we need to appropriately care for our adults working in this space in order for them to even be able to do this work? And I am can I say it? You can edit it out. Ratios need to change. I just said that.
I'm editing that out. Say it again.
Ratios are so unbelievably inappropriate. We can't. And so, I mean, in terms of people feeling like they have appropriate breaks, people feeling that they have our brain and body. Okay, here's my soapbox. Our brain and body, when we go back to this idea of allostasis and allostatic load and allostatic overload, if I am with little people who are demanding my attention for 8 straight hours with very little break, I don't even give my body the biological, physiological need to even work at getting itself back into homeostasis. I don't ever have the opportunity to step away from the inundation of overload for just the physical re-regulation of my everything. And so I'm like, okay, appropriate breaks, appropriate support, different ratios.
Yeah.
It all just needs to change.
I'm with you, especially if we keep adding things to people's plates. I'm with you. I don't think we edit that out, can we? I think that is like everybody listening to that is probably clapping.
Yeah.
For me, when I stepped away from working in a classroom I would work. That's a whole nother episode on burnout and this and that, but I would go early and stay very late. My lunch break often was not a break. I would eat on the go, making copies, prepping, calling parents, that kind of thing. So much so to the fact that my kids still pointed out, they're like, why do you eat so fast? I was trained how to eat very quick when I wouldn't have an appropriate break time. And that's not dogging on any, that's just system wide. We have some work to do, I think. And as advocates, I think it is okay to name that and say, we need to look at our ratios. We need to look at how we're providing appropriate breaks, training, support for our staff, the ones on the front lines holding the babies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a program that I was involved with eons ago. And at one point, and it was a well-intended misunderstanding, or the person wasn't in the field, didn't have all of the, and I get it. Like, that's just, you don't know what you don't know.
Yep.
And because there were hired therapists, it was like, well, we have an identified therapist who's the behavior support person for this program, let's say this multi-classroom program. The comment was, well, all of our teachers have degrees, or we have a therapist on staff. And in Carrie's, kind of snarky little way, I reply back, I'm like, I don't care if we all have PhDs. Numbers are numbers are numbers.
Yes.
I don't care what our training and background is. I mean, that's just all irrelevant. It's the fact of the matter that there are 12 people demanding my attention 20, constantly for the entire duration I'm here.
Yes.
I can't even let my body get re-regulated to be present and attuned.
And I think, again, that comes back to your whole point of trauma-informed practice is self-compassion, self-love, but we also have to have systems that support that for our adults.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there is good work happening, but we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of good work happening. And I was going to say, so grateful for all of the amazing resources our state has and how hard we're all working to get this movement. So many people working together to get in this direction. Yeah. One step at a time. One step at a time. And I think even having conversations like this and having episodes that support and make our workforce feel a little bit more heard and valued are important parts of that too. Yeah. Carrie, can you share with our listeners, you mentioned earlier that you were recently reading a book about the Grand Canyon analogy in trauma. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that. Yeah, that book I just came upon a couple of weeks ago. Its title is Widen the Window, Training Your Brain and Body to Thrive During Stress and Recover from Trauma. Cool. By Elizabeth Stanley. Ooh, okay. And we will link that in the show notes too. Very cool. Awesome. Oh, Carrie, I can't say thanks enough. I knew this would be fun and I really enjoyed chatting with you again. You just are a wealth of knowledge, and I'm thankful that you're here supporting our Nebraskan providers for sure. And thank you for doing this. Thanks for having me. And thank you for lifting all of these messages up and getting it in some platform out to people who are doing the hard work on the daily basis. Yeah. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Please join again as we chat about future topics to support our Nebraskan providers on their journeys with Step Up to Quality. Until next time, bye-bye.